Round 3 at Long Beach brought just about everything you would expect. We saw some very tight racing, pit strategy being critical in the outcome of this race, and as with any street circuit, just a small mistake can lead to a big issue. This is your Grand Prix of Long Beach post-race report. Now, the number 31 Action Express Racing Cadillac has been arguably the fastest GTP car so far this season. Now, despite this, they still haven't emerged with their first win yet, but heading into Long Beach, Cadillac was looking to change that and to get on the win column in 2024. Before we skip ahead to the race though, let's touch on some things that happened in practice. In first practice, Brandon Aribe, who was driving the number 70 Inception Racing McLaren, found the wall and ended up bringing out the red flag. Thankfully now there wasn't too much damage to the car, but the same could not be said later in the session for the number 32 Korthoff Motorsports Mercedes. Michael Grenier had a much more significant hit in that car, and ultimately it required a tow. Now, despite this setback though, they were able to get the car ready to go for qualifying and had no issues heading into the race on Saturday. Thankfully, practice 2 ran clean, so we can move on to qualifying. And in qualifying, despite some of the issues that some of those GTDs found during practice, it was a clean session for the GTD. Here, it would see Parker Thompson post a 1:17.35 second lap time in the number 89 Lexus RCF GT3, edging out the number 12 entry of Frankie Montecalvo by just over 2.5 tenths. Now, of course, that number 89 Lexus was just a one-off entry for Long Beach, and actually Parker Thompson and Frankie Montecalvo are the full-time drivers for that number 12, so really interesting to see them go head-to-head and end up qualifying first and second. The GTP qualifying, though, it featured a bit more drama. The number 31 Cadillac looked to be the class of the session in the early going, and there was a moment around the midway point of this session where we didn't think that we would see the 01 Cadillac come out and actually complete a lap. It wasn't really clear what was going on at the time, but eventually with 5 minutes to go in the session, that 01 Chip Ganassi Racing Cadillac emerged from the pits and put in their laps. It was later learned that this was all just part of their strategy for Chip Ganassi Racing to try and have optimal tires at the end of the qualifying session. After the strengths that the Cadillacs showed throughout the weekend at this point, it really looked like the 01 was going to be the only car that could contest the 31 at this point, who had laid down a great lap early in the session. However, this didn't turn out to be the case. The number 25 BMW, driven by Nick Yololi, was actually able to put in the second best lap time in this session and be just 9 1/1000ths off the provisional pole time that was set by Pipo Derani. However, you'll notice I said provisional pole. The session was not over at this point, and the number 31 Cadillac was not done attracting attention. You see, in the closing minutes of the qualifying session, Pipo Derani, who again was sitting on pole at the time, would find trouble as he ran wide in turn 8 and found the tire barriers. Now, luckily for him, he was able to back the car out of the tire barriers quickly and prevent a red flag from being thrown. Of course, if you are the cause of a red flag, then your best 2 times that you've set in that session will be deleted. Thankfully for Pipo, that was not the case, and when all the dust settled at the end of the session, it was still Pipo Derani in the number 31 Action Express Racing Cadillac was able to sit on the GTP pole with a time of a 1:11.388 seconds. Notably, this keeps his perfect qualifying record intact for this season. Now, after passing post-qualifying tech, the number 31 crew was able to replace the damaged nose on that car, and they were able to do this, again, because it was after qualifying tech. They didn't incur a penalty for it. It certainly was a dramatic moment though, and dramatic moments we had plenty of, especially as we flipped over to the race on Saturday. Now, the start of the Acura Grand Prix of Long Beach would actually be relatively calm in both classes, as everyone was able to navigate the tight opening turn with ease. It was, however, not a good start for one of the favorites in the GTD class, as Frankie Montecalvo in the number 10 picked up a drive-through penalty for changing lanes before the start-finish line. The clean start to this race would unfortunately not last long, as right around the 11-minute mark we would have our first full course yellow come out. Here, Brandon Arieb in the number 70 McLaren would get into the wall hard on the exit of turn 5. He would bounce off the wall and slam into the number 120 Wright Motorsports Porsche, who really just had nowhere to go. The result of this was there was debris all over the track. The number 70 would need to be towed. Unfortunately, the 120 would also have to retire. And it was also a very close call for the leaders in the GTP class, especially the 01 Cadillac, who can be seen navigating through the scene of the accident right after it took place. Now, with minimum drive time being only 5 minutes for the GTP class, you might be expecting some pit stops to take place after this 11-minute into the race full course yellow that we got. But, however, that would not be the case, as this would be deemed a short yellow. Therefore, the pits are closed to non-emergency service, and those driver change pit stops would have to wait a little bit. The race will get back going and run clean until just about a little over an hour before the end of the race, and this is when the GTP pit stops started. Here, the number 6 Porsche would lead the charge into the pits, perhaps in part due to the immense pressure that they were under from the number 25 BMW. Now, this would be a pretty common theme in the race here, as BMW would be applying tons of pressure to Porsche throughout the remainder of this race. Also under this round of pit stops is where I think the move of the race occurred. During their pit stop, the 01 Cadillac opted for a zero-tire strategy, one that played out very well for Porsche here last year, and also would work out very well for them. Here, when pit stops cycled through, they would ultimately become the race leaders. Actually, maybe I should slightly correct this, as the pit stops would not end up cycling through until after a full course yellow came out. You see, right in the middle of all these pit stops, the number 40 Wayne Taylor Racing Acura of Luis Delatraz, who had just got into that car, crashed in virtually the same spot as the number 10 Acura did the year before. Here, it just looks like he's carrying too much speed into the corner. The rear end stepped out, and when he went to counter the slide, the front tires grabbed and just shot him right into the wall. This, however, would not be the end of the tough times in this race for Acura. You see, after we went back green, the remaining Acura in the race, the number 10, would get into the JDC Miller Motorsports entry and spin them out. Ultimately, they would be deemed responsible for the incident and issued a drive-through penalty. Now, you'll recall a moment ago that I said BMW was pressuring Porsche for much of the second half of this race. That pressuring would ultimately get a bit physical, as here the number 25 BMW gets into the back of the number 7 Porsche pretty hard, and they picked up some nose damage as a result. Now, this battle would continue even after this contact, and go right up until the biggest moment of the race. Now, I think we can all agree that one of the more iconic and one of the corners we're always keeping an eye on during this race is the hairpin corner. It's very tight, it's prone to cause contact between cars through here, and in some instances cause track blocking spins. With 22 minutes to go in the race, that's exactly what we got. As the GTP leaders were trying to navigate this tight section of track, the number 7 Porsche 963 would dive to the inside of the 78 Lamborghini, who they were trying to lap. Now in the hairpin, the number 78 Lamborghini had the number 7 Porsche on its inside and didn't have very much space on track. Ultimately, they ended up making contact with the right rear of the number 6 Porsche and spinning them out. This left it blocking the corner exit for a moment, and as a result, chaos would ensue from this. The number 25 got piled into hard by the 78 Lamborghini, and really just the turn 11 hairpin chaos would follow. In the end, there were numerous cars that picked up varying degrees of damage in this, but none of them got it worse than that number 25 BMW. Now, believe it or not, this incident actually would not bring out the full course yellow. That would come just a couple of moments later. But before we get to that, I just want to talk about this incident for a moment, because there's a few things about this that bother me. So it should be noted, the number 78 Lamborghini ended up picking up the only penalty from this incident. They got a drive-through penalty for incident responsibility. And yes, looking at the replay, you can see that he makes contact with the 6 that ultimately spins them out. But can you tell me where on earth the 78 was supposed to go here? Spinelli had nowhere to go, and it was because of an over-aggressive dive up the inside into a corner that is silly to try and pull a move off like this in. For me, in my eyes, the number 7 Porsche is more responsible than the 78 was for causing this incident. I mean, the entire race, we saw the GTP cars doing the right thing and being patient through this hairpin corner. It's very difficult to pass even one of the GTD cars through here. And as a result, we almost always see them just follow the GTD cars through single file and easily take them out of the corner down the long front straightaway. And what I hate about this even more is, not only in my eyes was the number 7 more responsible for this incident, but also the main competitor that they had pressuring them the entire race got the worst end of this whole incident. Yes, the 25 got by far the worst end of this one. They were able to limp the car around, get the nose replaced as parts and pieces were falling off this car as it was going around the track. But really, the 25 had their day absolutely ruined by this. And look, I want to clarify, I'm not saying that I think the 7 should be penalized for this. Ultimately, I think it's probably a racing incident. But how the 78 walks away from this being the one that's penalized is kind of beyond me. Now, I know the 78 had been throwing some aggressive moves into this point with actually their fellow class competitors, but I mean, come on, give me a break. They didn't deserve that penalty. It's an unfortunate situation for everybody, but I don't think the 78 should have been penalized in that, but here we are. Needless to say, this incident still bothers me even after taking a couple days to simmer down on it. But that's not all that happened in this race. There were a number of other incidents that took place after this track blocking turn 11 incident. In fact, just moments after this incident took place, another ridiculous incident would take place. Here it was the number 86 MDK Porsche who would send it up the inside of the 27 Heart of Racing Aston Martin and spin them right around in turn 6. Not surprisingly, as a result of this incident, they were given a penalty for incident responsibility and served their drive-through. Going back a couple minutes to the BMW that was involved in that turn 11 incident, they would be able to make their way back around the track to the pits, replace their nose, and go back out. Unfortunately, though, it was not the last we would hear from them. With 16 minutes to go, the 25 would find the turn 6 wall and bring out the final full course yellow of the race. This unfortunately was just a bit of a lazy incident, it looked like, although perhaps there was damage to that car which affected how it was driving. Regardless though, we bunched up the field one more time for a sprint to the finish. The green flag would wave with 8 minutes to go, and thankfully we would get a clean run to the end. When the dust settled and the cars took the checkered flag, it was the number 01 Chip Ganassi Racing Cadillac that would take the win after their great pit stop strategy saw them leapfrog the 31. Renger van de Zande and Sebastian Bourdais, the drivers of that car, would be in victory lane for the first time since Laguna Seca of last year. They managed to hold off the constant pressure from the number 31 Action Express Racing Cadillac, who would bring it home in second, and the number 7 Porsche Penske Motorsports 963 would round out the podium. In GTD, it was an absolutely dominating effort by the number 89 Vassar Sullivan Lexus in that one-off entry. Parker Thompson and Ben Barnicoat led 62 of the 65 laps en route to the win, and they beat out the number 96 Turner Motorsports BMW to the line by just under 1.5 seconds. And rounding out the podium was the 32 Korthoff Racing Mercedes. They rebounded from that practice incident for a very good finish. Some other notables in the class that picked up some good finishes were the number 66 Gradient Racing Acura of Stephen McAleer and Sheena Monk. They ultimately had to miss qualifying because of an engine change and started at the rear, but they would be able to make their way through the field for a very nice 4th place finish. Also notable were the number 55 Proton Competition Mustang and the number 13 AWA Corvettes, as they both managed a much needed solid finish as they crossed the line 5th and 6th place respectively. Now, something that I'm going to do for the rest of the season here after each race is put out a poll on whether you thought it was a good race or not. For the Acura Grand Prix of Long Beach, 89% of you thought that this was a good race, with the remaining 11% thinking it wasn't such a good race. And these results were pretty much the same across X and YouTube, and my opinion is maybe a little bit more split. I'm not convinced that this was a great race. I personally thought that it was a little bit too messy. Now look, I love this race. I love the Acura Grand Prix of Long Beach. I love the Long Beach circuit. And sometimes with street racing, yes, it can get a little bit messy. We're gonna maybe see some full course yellows. But here the thing that got me was just the driving standards again. We've talked about it multiple times recently, dating back to last year. We're seeing silly incidents and full course yellows as a result of them coming from reckless moves. And while I'm all for, a certain aspect of beating and banging and, hard racing, we're seeing stuff cross the line. And you can make the argument, we're always going to see, some of these silly incidents. We're always going to see, a momentary lapse in judgment from time to time. But it's just happening too frequently. We can't be talking about these after every single race. It's just leading to a ton of full course yellows, a ton of disruption in the racing on track, and I really, really hope this is something that we can see cleaned up a little bit as the season continues to go on. With that out of the way though, let's touch on the championship point standings coming out of Long Beach, presented by P1 Web Development. If you're looking for a custom website, then head to p1webdevelopment.com/yeses or hit the first link in the description. In GTP, it's the number 7 Porsche Penske Motorsports entry that leads the way with 1,032 points. That is 58 points ahead of the Long Beach winner, the 01 Cadillac. 31 Cadillac remains 77 points behind, with the number 40 Wayne Taylor Racing Acura 91 points behind, and the sister number 6 Porsche Penske Motorsports 963 179 points back in 5th. In GTD, it's the number 57 Windward Racing Mercedes that continues to lead the way here with 987 points. That is 185 points ahead of the number 96 Turner Motorsports BMW, the 34 Ferrari, the number 120 Wright Motorsports Porsche, and the number 32 Korthoff Mercedes round out the top 5. Coming out of this race, it's probably going to be memorable for being a bit messy. But it should also be memorable for Chip Ganassi Racing picking up a huge win in their last year with Cadillac. Last year with Cadillac, you say, yes, it is Chip Ganassi Racing's last year with Cadillac, and you can learn all about that right here. Huge shout out to all of the channel supporters. If you too want to support the show, then you can head to patreon.com/offintheesses. Click the join button below. Once again though, thanks for tuning in. I hope everyone has a great race weekend and doesn't go off in the S's.